Hey guys, hope you're well. My name's Harry. I record professionally under the name Confusious, predominantly for drum and bass, dubstep 140. Now, in today's session, I'm going to be running you through how I process my drums and how I bust my drums, all with free built-in Ableton and free VSTs and plugins. So you don't need to go out and spend any money to get anything to achieve what I'm going to show you today. So let's just give you a look at the finished product for these drums. Right, so let's just go ahead and open a new project. Change the BPM starters. Let's just start at 172. Now, 90% of the time I start with my drums when approaching a track. And the first thing I do when I start with my drums is find a good kick drum. So let's get the kick out of the little prep I've done today for today's session. So this is the raw kick that we've got. Right, so let's just go ahead by arranging that into a standard drum and bass kick pattern. The first thing I would do from here is dead mono the kick drum. The main transient of your kick, your snare, and your sub should all be mono to help with the cleanliness of the mix and to ensure that no matter what speaker system you come through, the drums are always front, center, and punching through. So I've gone by monoing the drums in this case. From there, I would add a slight bit of EQing, maybe to burst certain frequencies that I feel it needs. Let's just listen to it again. Maybe a bit more 40 hertz. Maybe a bit more 250 hertz. And a bit of top end to ensure that the kick's bright and will punch through. From there, I'd maybe add some slight saturation. So you can go to the saturator, drop down menu in Ableton, just click on a bit warmer, scroll the dry wet back to 0 and mix in. Way too much. On, off, on, right, and maybe a slight bit of compression. Start by adjusting the the threshold, should I say. When I compress maybe 2 decibels just to help everything that's low to bring it to the center. Start adjusting the attack. So typically you would want a fast attack or a slow attack to ensure the main transient and a fast release so that the compressor then activates. Turn the make up. Sounds pretty good there. Right, let's move on to the snare. So let's grab the snare out. This is the snare I've gone with today. Now let's just zoom in on there. We want to make sure that the transients are hitting. We want to ensure the brightness of the transient. So let's go and just drag that to the front, do a slight bit of cutting, adjust the fades. Right, let's just duplicate that across. Before we EQ, let's make sure that's mono. A slight bit of EQing, just get all those lower sub frequencies out. Just give the snare some body, maybe around 600 to 800 hertz. Maybe a bit more high end. Okay. Same as the kick before, I think I want to give it some more oomph, so let's go and grab a saturator, mix it in from completely dry. And some slight compression. After that, we could do with some post EQing just to boost the frequencies that feels like the snare is lacking. Right. After this, I would go for a percussive layer to the snare, so using things such as rides as layers to your snare can also really help the overall finish of the track. So let's just go and grab a ride. Let's just cut that so it sort of matches the overall length and time of the original snare. Let's grab a utility and give it some stereo width. So let's turn that up to 200 and see how it sounds. Okay. Some EQing. And maybe chuck a reverb before that. We'll see, just give it a bit more stereo width. Now let's mix that in. Sounds good there. Now I want to add a top layer to the drums. So I've grabbed this small loop. Let me find it, the top loop. And we just want the kick and the snare purely in this circumstance to give it some more body. So let's adjust the fades and make sure there's no clicks and pops. Right. Once again, we'll go and turn the utility up to 400. So we've got the main transient of the kick and the snare dead mono, and then we can add some stereo width to the drums with the top. So let's just turn that up to 400 and see how it sounds. Okay, that's good. Some slight EQing just to make sure everything sort of above 800 to 1000 hertz. And maybe a slight bit of selective reverb just to those higher frequencies. Very dry though, just to add a bit more width. All right, let's mix that in and see how it sounds. Beautiful. Let's move on to the hats. We're using very dry, clean samples, so you don't need to do too much processing to them. So in this case, let's just have a look at the hats. Let's just chuck these in and mix in. Maybe a slight bit of EQing. Beautiful. Let's add on to some more hats. Let's just have a listen. Okay, let's use these two. And some EQ. Now, let's hear how that sounds. Okay, now I could, some creative process that go into that, I could add some side chaining to those hats to give it a bit more bounce. So let's go and add some side chain. We'll have it about the same sort of length as the kick. So we'll do a 5:1 ratio, fast instant attack and release of about 15 milliseconds. Let's go and side chain it to the kick, take it down roughly 15 decibels. Let's duplicate that out and sidechain it to the snare too. Instantly a bit more bounce. Right, let's move on to adding some rides over the top. Some slight EQing, nothing too much needs to be done to these. Maybe boost out that 5K.
Make your music stand out, get more views, and way more engagement. Bring your music to life. Get Music Visualizer. In every format, even for social media. Get started today. The link is in the description.
And maybe a nice little shuffle to finish. We'll go back to this top loop because there was a cool little shuffle in there. Right. Now, let's just quickly EQ out those frequencies that we don't want. Beautiful. Now let's go and group everything we have here and just stem that out twice. Okay. So the first thing I would do is put a slight bit of pre-EQ. So I would cut my drums off at 15,000 hertz and I would ensure that everything under 100 to 150 hertz is mono, so in this case we'll go 120 and make sure that all information on the stereo field is also cut off at 15,000 hertz. The next thing I do from there is add some glue compression. So once again, I want a fast attack, quick release, a ratio of between 4 to 10 with about 1 to 3 decibels of gain reduction. So let's go and adjust that. That release around 4 sounds good. Let's adjust the ratio from 4 to 10. Adjust the makeup. The soft clip. Sounds good with the soft clip on. And we'll set the dynamic range to 25 decibels. Mix it in from dry to wet. Right. Now after this, the next thing I would do is tone back the volume just a little bit. Beautiful. Now, just to compensate for the makeup of the compressor. Now after that, I would use I use the Frontier limiter, which is a free limiter made by D16. Very simple, and it is free off the D16 website. So you've got your control input, your release times, your threshold, your makeup, and the soft clip. So let's go on and turn the soft clip up, the threshold down. We want a fast release as matching the glue compressor. So let's add some limiting and get the crunch. Way too much. Beautiful, compressing about 6 decibels, that's what we want. Now we'll adjust the makeup. Sounds good. The soft clip, better on or off. I think it sounds better on. Now we'll finish it off with some shelf EQ. I'm using the Acoustica Coral Baxter 2. This is a free plugin. You can go on the Acoustica website and grab it yourself. I want to add a bit more oomph to the low end sub. So we'll start by using the shelf of everything under 116 decibels. So you've got your frequency band here and your gain to the right of it. So let's go and start adjusting everything under 116 to start. Too much. Let's try 98. 84. Beautiful. Now let's just give everything above 2K a bit of top end. Beautiful. Now that all sounds very nice and good. We could end the session there, but I'm going to help you add a bit more weight and depth to your drums. So let's just go ahead by clicking on the group, right clicking, and create return track. Now, we want to create a parallel compression bus so we can layer the dry with a wet signal so we can give it a bit more thud and impact. So if you go ahead, back to the glue compressor box, click the drop down and select drum full parallel, drag it onto the return track. Now, if you go ahead and turn the signal, the audio from our drum bus to the return track, take the volume all the way down and slowly mix it in. Way too much. Let's hear it off. And on. Off and on. Right. Now, from here, we could also add a distortion layer to the parallel, or we could add some reverb. At the moment, I don't think the drums need any distortion as they're very punchy. I think they sound rather electronic, so we could add some reverb to help make it sound more like a live break. So if we go and grab some light room reverb, we'll do a bright room in this case. Let's solo the return track and adjust the parameters. Turn the dry wet down. Now let's unsolo that. And no return. Beautiful. So today I'm just going to give you a preview of a track that I have forthcoming on Celsius Recordings on November 25th. It's called No Dramas. I chose this track today because I feel there's a lot going on in terms of the different layering and breaks of the drums and keeping it exciting and funky, giving it swing, and it carries the track along through the arrangement with adding and subtracting various different breaks, grooves, rides, percussive elements, etc., etc. I like to always create different drums for every track that I do. This track's no different. How I approach processing and my drums will change in every track, but they mainly follow a specific formula. So I'll just give you a quick demo of what the track sounds like. I'll let it run for about a minute and a half, so you can get a feel of how the drums help and interact with the track and help kind of the progression and the arrangement of the tune. So without further ado, here's a little quick sneak peek at the track. Right, so that was a sneak preview at the track. Now, hopefully, you were able to hear the sort of various different elements that I've got going on in it and how I change and add certain percussive elements and various different switch ups throughout the different sections of the track to help carry and roll over into the next progression to help the arrangement of the tune. I like to have a lot of different elements and switch ups in my drums because it gives the tune dynamic and helps keep it interesting. I find a lot of tracks that I hear from, particularly in other genres and house and mainstream sort of music, they just have the one groove going on, like a very simple break, a very simple groove, and it just kind of sounds the same throughout the whole track, and it's not very interesting. So I like to take that to the next level and have every 8 to 16 bars add a switch up to help carry along the track, so it's not just the same break over and over again, and you're not relying on other elements of the track as much to help the progression, opposed to using the drums to help the progression, particularly in drum and bass, because the way I see it, what is the name of the genre? Drum and bass. So most importantly, I focus on the two main areas of the music, which are the most important: the drums, then the bass. So a quick look at the different sort of elements that I use. Now, with this track in particular, I just want to make it clear that because of the funky essence of the tune, and because I'm focusing a lot on the low end, I didn't go for a real solid kick drum. So it sounds like a real sort of mid-range, sort of 100 hertz punch with a bit of sub, so I can add the bulk of the meat in the low end. So this track, more often than not, I layer kicks. However, in this track, I've just gone with a DLR kick from one of his packs. Now, someone like DLR or Break or something like that, you can often get a lot of samples that are just really clean, and a lot of the processing and the finishing has already been done. So in this case, I've just monoed the drum, the kick drum, gave it a little spike in the areas that I felt like it was missing, just some top end sort of a click, and a bit more weight around that 45 hertz. Right, so as you can see, it's got a bit of meat to it, and it will work in conjunction with the rest of the track well. Now, I've also got going on the snare layers. So in this particular case, I've used 3 different layers to achieve my snare. So we'll just play it for you soloed. Right. So in this case, I've used, I believe this is one of my tops. It's got a lot of stereo width on it, as you can hear, which will come into play in a second. Now, this would be the main transient hit. I've sampled a break, I believe. Now that's my main transient hit. So I want that in mono because it will just help clean the overall mix down. And below this, I've got a tambourine, which is also in mono, which will sort of helps give it that high-end sort of shimmer that you want. If you just had a single snare, let me just solo this. You can see how it sounds a bit sort of flat. Now if I add in the stereo layer, and then the tambourine, just adds a bit more of a dynamic. I like very much to add percussive layers, rides, tambourines over my the main body of my snare. So I'm not so you very much keep the transient of the kick and the snare in dead mono, and then you might place some stereo width around the rest of the elements. If you can always add a quick utility onto your layers, you turn it up to 200 or 400, and then mix in over the other snares. Now, in this case, because I'm layering the snare, I've added a bit of glue compression, so let's just turn everything off. So I've layered the snare, all the different aspects of the snare. That's dry. I've then added a glue compressor. Now, fast attack, quick sort of release. Now, I left it on a ratio of 4:1 because I didn't want to overdo it, because there's still going to be processing going on in the actual drum group itself. Now, from there, I've added some limiting, really crunched it on the gain reduction, as you can see, compressing about gain reduction of about 6 decibels, and in the glue compressor, compressing about 2 to 3, so I didn't want to overdo it. I've then added this sort of rack, punchy drums, which isn't something that I use too often, but I found in this case it kind of helps give it a little bit of body. And then lastly, a bit of subtractive and additive EQing, just to get the sort of body of the track that I wanted. Now, because there's a lot of mid-range and low-end information going on with the rest of the track in the way of the music and the bass and the other breaks, I've kind of left this as more of a high-end, snappy snare, opposed to a low-end, weighty 150 to 250 hertz sort of thud, which in context of the track, actually it works, and it's what helps carry it along. Now, that's the kick and the snare sorted, so Right. So then after after I've sort of finished the kick and the snare and I've got the body of that down, I'll then move on to the different percussive elements. So maybe let's just solo this group. Right. So I've used a few of DLR samples in here, drum samples. I just find it's really got a clean sort of sound to it. Now, just a simple hat, a slight bit of EQing, some reverse open hats, another open hat, and then some more hats on top of that. So together, a lot of people you will find sort of just stick with, let's say, the kick, the snare, and a hat. And more often than not, their break will sound like this the whole way through the track. To me, that's good to have it for a certain part of the arrangement, i.e. the intro drums, for example. But to have it playing the whole way through, it sounds a bit boring and same. So you want to switch it up. So then after that, the kick and the snare, I've gone on to just adding a couple of different hats to sort of liven it up a bit. So we get on to this. Instantly adds a lot of depth. It helps the track a lot. Now that's kind of my starting ground. So I've got the basic hat groove going on. Now that just helped to make it that bit more interesting and gave it a bit more swing and helped carry it through. We've got the reverse hi-hats in the reverse open hats into a open hi-hat, and then that kind of helps along. From there, I'll add some shakers and some more percussive elements. So here I've got, and then after that, I'll try and find what else can I put onto it. So I've put some shakers out of a track that I was making with Dose. Right, adds a bit more depth. I've then added some more hats. Now, I'll go down the arrangement and see what else I can add. So then I'll get into some more hats. Now, I've also just, as I've been flicking through, I'm just showing you that I haven't really touched the processing much on these individual hits because they're already clean sounds and they sound great. Maybe I might just do some slight EQing to get rid of certain frequencies that will clutter the mix, and they don't really need too much. Yes, you could go into more depth with side chaining certain percussive elements and hats, example, to the kick and the snare to give it a bit more bounce, but in this case it didn't really need it. I've just mixed them in to taste. Now I'm going to get on to the breaks. So you might have noticed that I've added some little shuffles. So adding little shuffles to help carry the groove into each section is good. Now, don't just keep the same little 2x loop going the whole way through. Add a couple of variations and iterations through it, and add and subtract. So in this case, I've added these little shuffles, and in context, let's just hear it again. Let's turn all this off. And now behind that, we've got the single hit. I've added a little drum roll behind that just really sort of helps make it interesting and carry it into the next section of the track. Let me just undo this and group all these and solo them. Right. Now, adding little shuffles like this help add the groove and the swing to a track. Now, particularly something with a lot of horns and groovy sort of bass, it adds that swing and those little textures. Without it, the groove sounds fine. Let's just hear it by itself with nothing but the shakers, the hats, and the kick and the snare. So it sounds okay, but we want to add a bit more excitement to it. So let's hear it with the shakers. Instantly, that adds a bit more depth to the track. Now, after this, I like to chop up a lot of I like to add a lot of rides. Sorry, I'm jumping too far ahead of myself. Rides really add that top end shine that you find you're often missing. So in this case, I've just grabbed some rides, very simple, and a slight bit of a boost around 5k just to help punch through. Below this, some shakers, I believe. The shakers with the rides combined. This is more of a Foley sort of hit more than anything. And it just helps, as you can hear, it gives it a bit more, makes it a bit more interesting. So I'll continue to go down and add different layers. I'll then get onto the breaks. So in conjunction with these two shuffles, you can hear that instead of just having one single shuffle, think about how you can take it further and add more elements on the top over your initial shuffle to help give it more body, help it to sound more interesting, to have more impact. So in this case, I've used 1, 2, 3. Below, I've also used another little hat loop, an open hat, a little chop of a break, and then the Lynn Collins think break. Right. I've added a further break and then some more hats. Right. So that kind of goes into a bit of detail about adding the layering. Now, sampling old breaks is good because it just adds a bit more character to the drums. These are all the clicks, the Lynn Collins, the classic break that everyone knows about. Now in this case, I've boosted the frequencies, put it in mono, boosted the frequencies that I wanted to shine through, taken out some of the frequencies, or most of the frequencies that I don't want, add a slight bit of reverb to give it a bit more sort of width and carryover, and then added some saturation to really help push through those frequencies. So
make your music stand out, get more views, and way more engagement. Bring your music to life. Get Music Visualizer in every format, even for social media. Get started today. The link is in the description.
all right, let's turn all this off. Now from there, imagine you've just built down 34 clips in this case of all your different elements of your drums, and you're working on an 8 bar loop. From there, I would go into starting to just duplicate it across 16, 32, 48, 64, and then stretch it out right till you get the whole arrangement of the first drop. From there, I would go through and add, and I would start with my intro, so I would take out the majority of the drums and be left with, right, so that's the first 16 with the intro. I've then gone, okay, so what can I do to help carry the intro into the next section? So I've added some breaks that I've chopped up. A Lynn Collins break with another Lynn Collins break. So in context, into the next section. So I've you might think, what the hell is going on there? In context, with all the little shuffles and the hats, I've also laid another different break that was out of an 89 to 96 break. I can't remember the specific track. Lay it on top. Right. So that gives it more depth and helps carry into the next section, keeps it interesting. Then what have I done? I've gone through and added some more shakers, the kick, the snare. This is, bear in mind, these are still the intro drums. I've then gone back into this section and added the build breaks to help act as a drum roll into the drop. So into the main drop with some rides, and then I'll go through every section one after the other, add little break chops and little vocal samples. So you'll find that by adding and subtracting certain elements and keeping each 16 bars of the progression, giving them all a difference and making them all different, and it really helps build a progression. So you'll get to a 64 bar drop with each 16 bars being different. So it's exciting. You can hear the drums progressing and changing. You can add some effects into your drum bus so they then get the overall, add the finish. So in this case, I've added, I think it's a scratch with a build drop. So a scratch with a gunshot with a little drum roll into the rides. So I always try and think to myself, how can I take the break further? How can I make it more interesting? And then after a couple of hours of building up the different elements and adjusting them to taste, I will then go through and stretch the arrangement out. I'll start with the body of the drop, and then I'll work back to the intro and the joining elements that help carry and tie the tune along. So then I will end up with the first drop or the whole track of just a drum groove, but a drum groove in the way that you can just listen to the drums by themselves, and that will have the whole, it will, by just listening to the drums itself, it will be enough to keep you interested throughout the whole 4 or 5 minutes, opposed to just hearing a little 8 bar drum loop played for 3 or 4 minutes, that's the same, that doesn't change. That would be boring. You'd get sick of it after 20 or 30 seconds. If you keep adding and subtracting various different elements and processing and effects, you could listen to this whole 4 or 5 minute song with nothing but the drums, and it would be exciting because there'd be a lot of change and a lot of different elements. And now from there, once I've done all my EQing and processing on the various different elements, I will then group everything up. So that will be my first EQ, just to ensure the cleanliness of the track. After that, in this case, I've added some multi-band compression just to help sort of hold back those certain frequencies from getting too loud and just hold everything together as one. I've added a glue compressor after that with a slow attack and a quick release on the ratio of 10 just to give it that punch. Now, gain reduction is about 2 to 3 decibels in most cases with my drums. I've then cranked the makeup up a bit more than I usually would with my drums because I felt like it needed a punch. I generally set the dynamic range on my compressor to about 25 decibels. In this case, the clip sounded better on soft clipping, and the dry wet is all the way up, as I felt like the wet signal sounded a bit better than the dry. I could have mixed it in at around 60 to 80, but in this case, I have turned it all the way up. After that, after the glue compressor, I have added some limiting. Now, this is the Frontier limiter. It's made by D16. I've been using it religiously for the last 6 months on a lot of my drum buses, just due to the nature of the sound that it gives you. Once again, the gain reduction, I've now poked it up to 12, which is compressing it a lot. I've then turned the makeup up to about roughly 3 decibels with the soft clip on. Now, that's generally about how my drums look most of the time, should I say. So some EQing, a compressor, glue compression, a limiter, and then post EQ. However, in this case, I wanted to make sure that the transients I felt like the limiting and the compression kind of lost a bit of the transients. So I added a transient shaper. Taking down the volume a bit. Now, as you can see, the dry wet is only on 3.9, so it just helped that punch. I just wanted to ensure that the transients and the body and the punch of the drums were definitely coming through. Now, I've turned down the overall volume because it was getting way too loud, and I wanted to make sure that I achieved a -6 decibel mix down for mastering. I've then actually pulled back the stereo width of the track just a bit to hold everything together and bring it back a bit closer to center, which will come into play later on down the line when you're doing your mix down and your the final mastering of the track. Having the drums sort of centered, the main elements centered, i.e. your kick, your snare, the transients of the kick and the snare, and the body of the kick and snare in mono, a few of the hats, and the majority of the breaks in mono will allow for a much cleaner mix further down the line. If you have stereo width kicks and hats and snares and all your hats are panned 50% to the left or the right and it sounds really cool in your headphones, and then you get into a car or on a system and all of a sudden everything disappears or it just sounds like a wall of noise, you will know why. You want those, particularly for drum and bass, the majority of the systems that you will play through will be mono, so you want those drums mono. So when people are listening to the track on their phone or laptop speakers, everything comes through clear. I've then made sure with the processing after that my drums are cut off at 15,000 hertz just to help. And I've also toned back a bit more volume. Right, so we have ended up with the processing of the drum bus. From there, I have then gone and created a return track. The drums sound fine as is. So you can hear that there's a lot of punch, everything sounds really good, but I want to ensure that I'm getting a lot more body and weight and oomph to my drums. So I will always set up a parallel compression bus. So in this case, I've sent all the audio to the return, the A return. I have then just gone under glue compressor here, and then if you scroll down, you'll find full parallel. We'll just save a bit of time. I've then added some saturation. So then I end up with a parallel bus that sounds something like this. Let me turn that up. What that will do, layered over your drums, it will add the dry wet signal on the top of each other. So then you'll get to mixing the track in, and let's just slowly mix this parallel in after a slight bit of tinkering with the effects. So I'm mixing it in slowly, as you can see on the right. Off. On. Now you will hear the difference immensely when you're in a studio with the studio sub or when you're out in the club. The difference between having a dry wet signal in a parallel bus on your drums is really noticeable when you get out to a system. It adds that body and the weight that you still will often feel like your drums are missing when you just have one single drum bus. By adding a parallel, that will really fix up the body. Now, a few other things that you can do when it comes to parallel compression is if you've got really dry digital sounding drums, electronic sounding drums that are sharp and clicky, to help give them a bit more of a live human feel, you could do your parallel compression, but add some small room reverb to the parallel bus. So in this case, my drums sound pretty sort of live with those breaks going on. But to increase that, I could add some reverb to that. I would low cut the input processing into the diffusion network. I'd add a little bit of pre-delay. I'd probably tone it back just so the reverb hits after the initial transient strike. Maybe turn the decay up a bit and turn the dry wet down. So this would be what the drum bus sounds like, or the parallel bus. Let's turn that up. And then I would layer that over my drums. As you can hear, that gave it a lot more of a live sound to it, like almost as if the drums had been recorded in a small bright room. So there are options, and to further this, instead of having a reverb to dry them up, you could add some distortion behind the parallel. So you could add some distorted drums with your really clean sounding break to give it that groove, give it that grit that you were looking for. So that kind of wraps up today's session on how I do my drums, the different thought process that going behind it, the processing and the finishing touches of the parallel compression to really fatten the weight up. Now this method can be applied across hip hop, house, every genre. That wraps up today. Thank you very much for listening. My name's Harry Confucius, and hope to see you again next time.